He used me like a tool. Said I was too old to be anything but available. Then one night, when I finally said no, he shattered my leg. But today, that same man walks through my building with his eyes to the floor, hoping I'll forget what he did. My name is Janet. And this is the story of how I was used, broken, and left behind until a miracle happened. Before I begin, I just want to ask, where are you watching from? Drop your country or your city in the comments below. And if you're a woman over 60 who's ever been used, ignored, or hurt by someone you trusted, please like, share, and subscribe. Not for me, but for the women out there who think they're the only ones suffering in silence. Because we're not alone anymore. I'm Janet Foster. And this is how my body was turned into a bargaining chip. How I was used, broken, and left to bleed. And how, by some miracle, I became the one he had to beg. I was 63 when it finally happened. When he broke me. But it didn't start that night. No, it started years before that. Quietly. In little ways. The kind of ways you don't even realize are abuse until you're already drowning in them. I had just turned 58 when I started the job, night shift janitorial work in a luxury furniture factory just outside Grand Rapids, Michigan. I took it because it paid under the table and didn't ask too many questions. No one cared that I was a divorced, broke, exhausted woman who hadn't worked in 20 years. They just handed me the mop and told me to get to work. And I did. 12 hours a night. 6 days a week. My knees cracked every time I bent. My hands blistered from chemicals. My eyes stayed bloodshot. But I didn't complain. Because I needed it. I needed the money. And because he had a way of making me feel like I didn't deserve better. His name was Mr. Dale. Clean suit. Slick hair. That confident tone men use when they know no one will ever hold them accountable. At first, it was just comments. You move slow, grandma. Used to be tight young girls cleaning up, now I get your sagging ass? He'd laugh. The others would pretend they didn't hear. Then one night, he asked me to clean his office after hours. Just me. There was nothing to clean. But he locked the door and told me, if you want to keep this job, Janet, you'll learn to be flexible. Just like when you were younger. I stood there frozen. I was 59. Alone. With no health insurance. No savings. My son hadn't called in months. My rent was late. I didn't say yes. But I didn't say no either. And so it began. Quiet visits. Late night whispers. Promises of overtime. And every time I tried to pull away, he reminded me, no one's gonna hire someone like you, Janet. You're old, you're slow, and you're already broken. But me? I'm kind enough to keep you. Kind. That's what he called it. Until the night I told him I wanted to stop. I was done being used. I was tired, in pain, and I couldn't take another second of pretending my soul wasn't rotting. He didn't scream right away. He smiled. Then he stood up, walked behind me, and shoved me into the metal filing cabinet. I fell sideways, my leg catching beneath me. I heard the snap before I felt the pain. And then, oh God, the pain. I screamed. I sobbed. He leaned down close to my face and whispered, "You're lucky I even looked at you. Old, sagging, pathetic. You're not a woman. You're a mop with tits." And he walked out, left me there on the concrete floor, bleeding, unable to move. If this part of my story has reached you, please comment below. Tell me if you've ever been made to feel invisible, or used, or too old to matter. Because the world wants women like us to disappear. But I didn't, and neither will you. The pain didn't stop when he left me lying there. It got worse. I must have passed out after a few hours. I remember the concrete cold, wet from the mop bucket I knocked over. I remember trying to move, dragging my body like some wounded animal. But the pain in my leg, it was like fire had settled inside the bone and decided to live there. Someone must have found me eventually. I don't remember the ambulance, just flashes, white lights, a woman's voice saying, "We've got a fracture," and the sound of my heart on a machine. When I opened my eyes, I was in the hospital, leg wrapped in a cast. for in my arm, my body felt like it had been peeled open and stitched back together wrong. A nurse came in. Young, kind. She held my hand gently and said, "You were found unconscious at work. They say you fell." They said. I looked at her. I wanted to scream the truth. I wanted to tell her that my boss had shattered my leg with his boot, that he'd used me, humiliated me, taken from me things I can never get back. But I couldn't get the words out, because shame is heavy, and when it's been piling on your back for decades, it buries your voice before it even reaches your lips. Later, a police officer came in. He was polite, took a few notes. Then he said, "The company says you tripped on wet flooring. They logged it in their safety report. You're lucky you weren't alone too long." I stared at him. My jaw clenched. I said quietly, "Did they say anything about the bruise on my face?" He paused, looked down at his paper, then said, "No mention of that, ma'am. Sometimes in a fall, people hit their head." That was it. No arrest. No charges. No real questions. Just a line on a form and a message to take it easy. He didn't see the handprint. He didn't ask about the other bruises, old ones, faded into yellows and greens. He didn't ask why my wrists had bruises like I'd been grabbed too hard. Because no one wants to know the ugly parts. Especially when the ugly parts were a woman's face past the age of 60. I stayed in that hospital bed for 4 days. For days of silence. For days of staring at ceiling tiles and thinking about every time I'd let him use me. Every time I'd stayed quiet. Every time I'd traded dignity for survival. And then something happened on the 5th day. Something small, but it changed everything. A letter arrived. From a company I'd forgotten I ever invested in. Just a few $100s here and there years ago, when I was still trying to catch up on retirement. I'd sent them small monthly payments from my cleaning wages, barely noticing the deductions. But the letter said this: "Congratulations, Ms. Janet Foster. Your holdings in Horizon Block Technologies have vested. You are now a Class A shareholder with 18% equity. We would like to discuss future acquisition plans for the West River Industrial Zone, specifically the warehouse at 1212 Blythe Street." My warehouse. The one I nearly died in. I reread the letter 4 times. My hands shaking. I didn't understand at first. And then I did. I wasn't just a cleaner anymore. I was part owner of a tech firm. And they wanted the land my abuser stood on. To everyone watching this right now, let me ask you this. Have you ever been so used, so discarded, that you started to believe you really were nothing? I did. Until that letter showed up. And suddenly, he needed something from me. Getting home from the hospital wasn't like in the movies. There was no one waiting. No flowers. No warm soup or quiet tears. Just the city bus, the pain in my chest, and a pair of crutches that made every step feel like punishment. The apartment I lived in smelled like mildew and cold oil. 2nd floor. No elevator. I had to beg the bus driver to help me up the stairs because the landlord had already warned me once, I'm not running a nursing home. I sat on my lumpy sofa that night, my leg throbbing in its cast, and stared at the walls. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just sat there and felt nothing. Because when you've been through hell for long enough, sometimes even pain stops showing up. But I had that letter. I read it again. And again. 18%. That number kept echoing in my mind like a drumbeat. Me, Janet Foster. 18% of a tech firm that was about to buy the same warehouse where I'd been used like trash. Where I was dragged, broken, bled, and left behind. It felt impossible. Like a prank from the universe. But it was real. The next morning, Horizon Block made their move. They sent official notices to all current leaseholders in the West River Industrial Zone. And one of them went directly to Dale Reardon, my former boss. My abuser. I imagined him reading it. This property has been marked for acquisition. Tenants will have 90 days to respond to relocation inquiries. Failure to comply may result in legal action. Oh, I knew Dale wouldn't take it well. Men like him, Men who built their confidence by tearing women down, they don't react kindly to power shifts. Especially not when the shift comes from someone they thought they'd destroyed. By noon, I got a text from a number I hadn't saved, but I knew the tone. The entitlement oozed through every word. I heard you were involved in this buyout thing. Is this a joke? We both know you don't have that kind of brain. Did you sell yourself to somebody else again? I stared at the screen. My stomach twisted, but not with fear. This time, it was something else. Satisfaction. Control. I didn't reply. I let the silence speak. And that night, for the first time in years, I slept. I mean, really slept. No nightmares. No heavy breath in my ear. No phantom hands grabbing at my blouse. Just peace. Because I finally had something that no man could ever use, take, or humiliate me for again. I had leverage. To every woman watching this, especially those of you who've been told you're too old, too stupid, too broken to ever matter again, listen to me. They lied. There is always a door waiting to open. There is always a chance for power to come back to your hands. And sometimes, the person who broke you the worst ends up needing you the most. It was raining that morning. One of those cold Michigan rains that slaps the windows sideways and makes you feel like the sky itself is angry. I was making tea. One crutch under my arm. The sound of the kettle hissing reminded me of the machines back in the factory, how they roared louder than my screams the night he broke me. Then there was a knock. 3 sharp bangs. I froze. No one knocks on my door. Not anymore. Not unless they want something. I hobbled over and peeked through the tiny crack in the curtain. My breath caught in my throat. It was him. Dale. No suit. No clean shave. No smug look. He looked smaller. His shirt was wrinkled. His hair thinned and grayer than I remembered. And for the first time in years, there was something behind his eyes that I had never seen before, not power, not cruelty, but fear. I opened the door halfway, just enough for him to see my cast, my face, my silence. He didn't say hello. He didn't ask how I was. He just started talking like nothing had happened. Janet, listen. I think there's been some confusion. This Horizon Block thing? I don't know who lied to them, but they're threatening my lease. My business. I got 40 employees, you understand? Families. You can't just… I didn't blink. You broke my leg, I said softly. He paused. Just for a second. Then he laughed. Come on now, you said it was an accident. You were always clumsy. You slipped no. I said nothing, because you made sure I couldn't. My voice didn't shake. Not this time. It had weight now. It had roots. He shifted on his feet, realizing I wasn't falling into old habits. I wasn't going to shrink. Not anymore. Janet, I'm not here to fight. I'm asking for help. If you have a stake in Horizon Block, you could stop this. I'll lose everything. Everything. He said it like I should care. Like I hadn't already lost everything a long time ago. My dignity, my body, my voice. You left me bleeding on the floor, Dale. You used me. You humiliated me. And when I was too broken to be useful to you, you threw me out like trash. He looked at the ground. For once, he had no words. Now you're standing on my doorstep, asking me to save you? I never meant for things to go that far, he whispered. I stared at him. But they did. Then I did something I never thought I'd have the strength to do. I shut the door. Slowly, quietly, and locked it. He stood there for a moment. I could feel his desperation pressing against the wood. But I didn't open it again. Because I wasn't the woman he broke anymore. I was the woman he had to beg. To the women watching this, if someone has ever broken you, hurt you, and then made you feel like you were the one to blame. If someone left you alone when you needed love the most, and now you're older, weaker, and wondering if life has already decided who you are, don't believe that. Because power doesn't always come with noise. Sometimes it shows up on crutches. Sometimes it speaks through silence. And sometimes it locks the door. 3 days passed after Dale stood on my porch. He didn't come back, but I could feel him in the air. Like a storm is still hovering just beyond the hills. That kind of fear doesn't leave you easily, even after the power shifts. Even when they're the ones on their knees. I kept replaying the sound of my door clicking shut in his face. Over and over. Not because I regretted it, but because it felt like I'd reclaimed something I didn't even know I'd lost. My right to say no. Then, on Friday morning, there was another knock. I tensed. But this time, it wasn't him. It was Luis, the janitor from the warehouse. The quiet one, the man who always stayed in his lane, never talked much, never looked anyone in the eye too long. He'd worked the floor longer than I had, probably since the 90s. His hands were always calloused. His back hunched like life had spent years pressing down on it. And he looked nervous. Real nervous. "Miss Foster," he said, not meeting my eyes. I hope I'm not bothering you." I blinked. No, not at all. He clutched his hat in both hands like it might run away. "I heard about everything. About Horizon Block. About your accident. My leg." I asked. "No, ma'am," he said, lowering his voice. "About what he did. What he really did. I was there that night. I saw it." A long silence filled the room. My breath caught. "You saw it?" He nodded. His eyes finally lifted to meet mine, and what I saw there wasn't just guilt. It was shame. I should have said something. I should have stopped him. But he had power. I had a mortgage and 3 kids. I didn't think anyone would believe me if I went against him. I stared at him for a moment, then asked softly, "So why now?" He looked down. "Because I heard what he's trying to do. Begging the city council to halt Horizon Block's buyout. Lying. Saying you made it all up. That you're unstable. That you're trying to ruin him because he let you go." Then he looked back up. "But I saw the truth. I saw what he did to you. I saw how he treated you for years. And if you want me to speak to anyone, I will. I can give you my statement. On paper. In court. Whatever you need." Tears welled up in my eyes. I didn't mean to cry. I didn't want to give that moment the weight of tears. But something inside me broke, not from pain, but from relief. Someone saw me. Someone finally said, "You were telling the truth." After all these years, I wasn't just a broken old woman with a story people politely ignored. I was a survivor. And now I had a witness. To every woman watching this right now, especially those of you who've carried your stories alone, who've been told your pain was exaggerated or fabricated, let this moment remind you, someone saw. Someone heard. And someday, someone will speak. It may not be today. It may not be tomorrow. But justice has a memory. And it always comes back around. 2 weeks later, I stood in a room I never thought I'd see from the inside. A city council chamber, under fluorescent lights, with nameplates on a long wooden table and bottled water for the dignitaries. It smelled like old paper and power. I had never worn a suit before. But that day, I borrowed one from a neighbor, a dark navy blazer with shoulder pads and a pearl pin. My cast was off, but I still limped. Every step reminded me of him. And every step made me walk straighter. I didn't come alone. Luis was right behind me, wearing his best shirt and carrying a written statement folded into quarters like a sacred relic. I could see how scared he was. I was too. But fear, I've learned, is just a visitor. And that day, it wasn't welcome. Dale was already there, at the other end of the room, in his crisp suit, looking polished, controlled, the kind of man who always looked like he was about to win. He didn't look at me. Not once. The Horizon Block executives sat at the center table, reviewing acquisition proposals. The public session had opened due to complaints from tenants, most of them small warehouse owners afraid of being bought out. And Dale? He was their ringleader. "This woman," he said, motioning in my direction without saying my name, "is using her stake in Horizon Block to carry out a personal vendetta. She has a history of emotional instability. She was terminated from our company for inappropriate behavior, and now she's trying to sabotage local business through this acquisition. I could hear the murmurs, the way some heads tilted in curiosity. It hurt. Not because I believed him, but because once upon a time, I used to. Then the council president spoke. Ms. Foster, would you like to respond? I stood. My leg shook. My voice didn't. My name is Janet Foster. I worked the night shift at Reardon Furniture for 5 years. During that time, I was not only underpaid and overworked, but repeatedly used, manipulated, and eventually assaulted by Mr. Dale Reardon. Someone gasped in the back. I kept going. I did not file a report then because I was scared. I was alone. I was old, broke, and tired. But that man kicked me so hard, he snapped my leg in two. And then he left me there, bleeding, unconscious. The room fell into silence. He says I'm unstable. I say he's lucky I stayed quiet for as long as I did. Then I handed them a folder. Inside were my hospital records, photos of my injuries, and notarized statement from Luis. And one more thing, a signed letter from Horizon Block, officially recognizing me as a stakeholder with voting rights on all West River industrial transactions. The council read, and read again. Dale began to squirm. He stood up, trying to interrupt. This is slander. Mr. Reardon, the council president cut in, you'll remain seated. They didn't say much after that. Just a few legal formalities. A vote to proceed. And then the decision. Horizon Block's acquisition would move forward, and Reardon Furniture would be given 60 days to vacate. That was the moment. The exact second Dale realized everything he'd built was no longer his. To those watching, you're never too old to be heard. You're never too late to be believed. Don't let your age, your silence, or your scars make you feel like your story is over. Because mine had just begun. 2 days after the council hearing, he came again. I knew he would. Men like Dale don't go down quietly. They try to twist the ending, rewrite the script, claw back what they think belongs to them. But this time, I was ready. I was folding laundry on my small couch when the knock came. Just one. No pounding. No shouting. I opened the door slowly, and there he was. No tie. Eyes red. Shirt untucked. He looked like a child who'd just been sent home from school in shame. Except this child had ruined lives. Janet, he said softly. Please. I just want to talk. I didn't move. Didn't speak. Just stared. He took that as permission. I'm not the man I was, all right? Things got out of hand. I was under pressure. The business was collapsing. I wasn't thinking straight. He tried to sound broken. Regretful. But I could hear it, the panic hiding just underneath. That edge of entitlement that never truly leaves a man like him. Like he believed deep down I'd still crumble if he said the right words. I know I hurt you, he continued. I know I did terrible things. But Janet, if you drop this, if you speak to Horizon Block and smooth things over, I can make it worth your while. And then he pulled out a check. A real one. From his personal account. He held it out with both hands, like it was an offering at a temple. The same hands that once slammed me against metal. The same hands that pushed me to the ground and left bruises I had to hide from myself in the mirror. $15,000, he said. It's yours. No strings. Just, let's end this quietly. I didn't take the check. I didn't even look at it. Instead, I said this. You used to grab me with those hands. Do you remember that? His eyes flicked away. You'd touch me like I was disposable. Push me when no one was looking. Whisper things that made my skin crawl. Tell me I was lucky you still wanted me. I stepped forward. And now, those same hands are trembling because you've lost everything they used to hold. I took the check between 2 fingers. Then slowly, ripped it in half. Then in half again. And dropped it on his shoes. You don't get to buy my silence, I said. Not now. Not ever. He stood there, stunned. mouth twitching like he couldn't decide whether to beg or scream. And I shut the door in his face. Again. To every woman watching. There may come a day when the ones who broke you show up with apologies wrapped in money, in sweet words, in promises of peace. But remember this. They're not sorry for what they did. They're sorry they can't do it anymore. Power isn't in forgiveness they didn't earn. It's in knowing you don't need them to speak your truth. A week later, I got a call from Horizon Block. I was stirring soup in my tiny kitchen, the kind I used to eat when I had only $1 to stretch through 2 days. Potato, onion, water. I didn't even flinch when the phone rang. That kind of calm doesn't come from peace. It comes from exhaustion that's finally learned to sit still. The voice on the other end was professional, polite. Ms. Foster? We're finalizing acquisition contracts for the West River Zone, and we wanted to reach out to you directly. My heart thudded once, heavy, but controlled. Of course, I said, steady as I could. Given your equity stake, we'd like to offer you something beyond just returns. As part of our redevelopment plan, we're issuing full management control over select properties to legacy investors. We'd like to offer you primary operational ownership of the warehouse at 1212 Blythe Street. The one where I was beaten. The one where I was used. Humiliated. Silenced. I'm sorry, I said. Did you just say ownership? Yes, ma'am. You'd have full authority to manage staff, contracts, renovations. It would be your call who stays and who goes. I didn't speak for several seconds. I just stared at the cracked tile above my stove, where grease stains told their own quiet history. And I thought how strange it was to go from being dragged across a floor to now owning it. I'll take it, I said finally. But I'll be making some changes. The woman on the other end laughed lightly. That's what we hoped you'd say. I visited the warehouse the next day. This time, I didn't limp. My leg still ached, yes, but there's something about walking into the place that nearly killed you, standing tall, with the deed in your hand, that makes your body feel stronger than it really is. The metal doors groaned open, and the air hit me like a memory: oil, sawdust, stale breath, and cold, fluorescent light. Everything looked the same. But I wasn't. Dale was in the office, his office, still clinging to some shred of hope, still barking orders at a crew that no longer answered to him. He looked up when I stepped in. His face went pale. Janet, he said cautiously, like I was a loaded weapon. What are you doing here? I held up the folder in my hand. Inside, the ownership transfer. Signed. Sealed. Mine. Just coming to take a walk through my building, I said calmly. He stood slowly. Nervous. Look, I know we've had history. Bad history. But if you're here to gloat, I'm here, I said, cutting him off, to make it very clear. You're done here. You can't fire me, he snapped. I built this place from nothing. I leaned forward, placed the folder on the desk, and tapped my name at the bottom. And now it belongs to the woman you left to bleed in the back hallway. Silence. He stood there, jaw twitching, chest heaving, then lowered himself into the chair. Not because he wanted to, but because he knew. He'd lost. To every woman watching this. They might take your job, your strength, even your body, but never your fire, never your truth. One day, you may stand inside the same place that tried to destroy you, and hold the keys in your hand. 2 weeks after I took ownership, the warehouse didn't look the same anymore. The grime was gone. The old signs were stripped. I had new lights installed, new locks, and a new name on the door: Foster Community Employment Center. Yeah, my name. The same name he used to spit with disgust now sat proudly on a bronze plate. I didn't turn it into another warehouse. I turned it into a center where women over 50 could get training, employment, and dignity. A place that paid fair, offered chairs with cushions, bathrooms with dignity, and doors that locked for protection, not power. Word got around fast. Luis was the first to come back and shake my hand. So were 3 other workers who had left because of Dale's cruelty. Some of them had broken teeth, bad backs, unpaid overtime stories that could fill books. I gave them all jobs. I gave them purpose. And then, one rainy afternoon, I saw a figure standing just outside the glass doors. I didn't recognize him at first. His jacket was torn. His beard was grown out. The man looked like a ghost wearing human clothes. But when he stepped inside and I saw those eyes, I knew. Dale. His hands were shoved deep in his pockets. His shoulders hunched. Janet, he said quietly, not even looking up. I'm sorry to show up like this. I folded my arms. You shouldn't be here. I know, he mumbled. I need work. Anything you have. I'm not asking for management or my old job. I just need to eat. My heart didn't leap. It didn't shatter. It just sat there, watching the moment like an audience at the end of a long, bitter play. You want to clean floors? I asked softly. He looked up then. Cautious, hopeful, humiliated. I'll do anything. I walked around the desk, stood just close enough to make sure he smelled the clean air of the place I rebuilt from the bones he tried to break. The mop closet is in the back, I said. And the same bucket I pushed at midnight? Still there. You'll clock in at 5, out at 11. Lunch is 30 unpaid. And if you ever speak to any woman in this building like you once spoke to me, you'll be on the street before you blink. He swallowed. Yes, ma'am. And one more thing, I said as he turned. Don't ever look at me like you're still the boss. Because now, you work for me. To every woman watching, this life will try to convince you that once you're hurt, you'll never heal. That once you're used, you'll never be valued again. But hear me now, the same mop they forced into your hands might one day be handed back to them. Because when justice is quiet, it speaks loudest. The idea for the speech didn't come from me. It came from one of the women I'd hired, Lorraine, 68 years old, freshly widowed, and training to work the phones at our reception desk. She'd watched me for days. Always polite. Always quiet. But that morning, she stopped me by the coffee station and said something I didn't expect. Ms. Foster, I think other women need to hear what you've been through. I blinked. They already know. The ones who work here, at least. Not them, she said gently. All of them. The women still stuck. Still quiet. Still thinking what's happening to them is just part of life. Her words stuck with me. So that weekend, I said yes to something terrifying, a women's workers' conference in Detroit. A nonprofit group reached out after hearing whispers of what I'd done with the warehouse. They asked me to speak. Me. A woman who used to mop blood off her own shoes to keep a paycheck. A woman who had once believed it's too late to start again. I almost said no, but then I thought of Dale, and how small he looked with that mop in his hand. And I thought of every woman who was still stuck with a monster like him. So I went. The room was packed. Over 300 women. Most of them older. Some in wheelchairs. Some with hearing aids. Some holding purses like they were the only thing they'd ever owned. I walked on stage, no podium, no flash. Just me and a microphone. I cleared my throat. And I began. When I was 62 years old, my boss used me. Repeatedly. Not just my hands. Not just my hours. Me. My body. My dignity. My silence. The room went still. He told me I was too old to complain. That no one else would ever want me. And when I finally said no, he broke my leg and left me bleeding behind a stack of factory chairs. Gasps. A few women closed their eyes. I saw heads nodding. Not in shock, but in recognition. But what he didn't know is that I was investing. Quietly, carefully, I became a shareholder in the company that now owns his building. And today that man? He mops the floor for me. Applause. Then standing applause. Then a silence so deep it felt holy. And then the cameras rolled. Because someone had live streamed it. And by Monday morning, that video had over 2 million views. Suddenly, my inbox was full. Messages from women in Florida, Ohio, South Korea, Portugal. Women over 60 who'd been abused, used, discarded, and told they were too old to matter. And buried in the middle of all that? A message from a local news station. They wanted to do a feature. Not just on me, but on him. We've heard rumors about what happened in that warehouse, Ms. Foster. If you're willing to speak on record, we'd like to investigate the business practices of Mr. Dale Reardon. I smiled for the first time that day. Because sometimes, justice doesn't knock quietly. Sometimes, it arrives with a camera crew. To every woman watching, you are not invisible. You are not too old. You are not too late. Tell your story. And if you can't yet, watch mine. Because one voice can open 1,000 locked doors. The news piece aired on a Thursday night. I didn't plan to watch it live. I thought maybe I'd record it, maybe listen later, in private. I'd spent too many years living in fear of being seen. But something about that evening felt different. So I sat there in my small living room, holding a chipped coffee mug with both hands. The television buzzed, the station logo faded, and then there it was. Tonight, in a WTGR exclusive, we investigate decades of alleged abuse, exploitation, and workplace harassment inside one of Michigan's oldest private warehouses, Reardon Furniture. His name. His face. Footage of Dale from a 2015 ribbon cutting played across the screen. He was smiling, arms crossed in confidence, standing beside city officials like a man who belonged there. Then came my voice. Not the shaky version of me from back then, but the strong, clear one from the conference. The video clip of me speaking on stage. He broke my leg when I said no. He used me like I was his property. And for years, I believed it was my fault. They aired Louis's interview next. His hands trembled, but his voice didn't. I saw what he did. I was too scared to say anything then. But I saw it. I saw everything. Then another voice. Lorraine. He used to say things to her, horrible things. Called her wrinkled garbage, told her she was lucky to be touched at her age. We all heard it. Each voice layered on the next. Each voice a nail in the coffin. Then the anchor's words sealed it. Mr. Reardon declined to comment. Our sources confirmed that Reardon Furniture is under investigation for multiple labor violations, unreported injuries, and civil harassment claims. The building has since been purchased and repurposed into a women-led community employment center under the ownership of Janet Foster. I didn't cry. I didn't clap. I just sat there and breathed. Because finally, the world knew. They knew what he did. They knew what I survived. And they knew who held the power now. But that wasn't the end. The next day, Dale's wife left him. Then came the eviction notice from the property he'd been renting after selling his home. Then came the calls from former investors pulling out, distancing their names. One of them even emailed me directly and apologized for ever believing him. By the end of that week, Dale Reardon had no business, no reputation, no home, and no one to blame but himself. And then he showed up. Again. This time, not at the warehouse, but at my home. He looked like a man soaked in humiliation. Tired. Hollow-eyed. Defeated. He knelt right there on my porch, in the same spot where I once stood bleeding and invisible. And he said, I have nothing left. I'm not here for work. I'm not here for revenge. I'm here because I don't know where else to go. And if you wanted to destroy me, you already did. I stood behind the screen door. Part of me wanted to feel joy, vindication, power, but what I felt was something different. I didn't pity him, but I didn't need anything from him either. Because when you've taken back everything they stole, you no longer need revenge. You already won. To every woman watching, you don't need to destroy the ones who broke you. Just stand. Speak. And the truth will destroy them on its own. Sometimes, justice is not loud. It's quiet and undeniable. A week after the news report aired, my phone wouldn't stop ringing. Emails, messages, invitations. Some from nonprofits, some from investors, some from women's rights groups asking if I would speak again. if I'd consider expanding the foster center, if I'd be willing to take the model national. There are women like you in every state, one message read. We'd love to help you build centers like yours across the country. I should have felt proud, maybe even excited. But instead, I felt still, quiet, like someone had handed me a crown, but I was still bandaging the wounds left by the thorns. I sat in my office, the one that used to be his. I looked at the same four walls where he once leaned over me and whispered power into my ear like poison. Now those walls were clean, white, framed with photographs of women we'd helped. Gloria, who'd found her first job at 66. Pearl, who escaped her son's financial abuse and now taught sewing to others. Real stories, real survivors. And still, part of me hesitated. Because healing, I've learned, isn't just about rising. It's about trusting yourself again. And after a lifetime of being used, it takes time to believe your voice is more than just a reaction to pain. Lorraine came in that afternoon and saw me sitting in silence. She didn't speak right away, just handed me a small box. It came this morning, she said. Woman from Ohio. Said she saw your speech. I opened it slowly. Inside was a handwritten letter. Dear Janet, I'm 72. I haven't left my house in 6 months, but after watching you speak, I opened my door. Just wanted you to know, there's at least one more woman out there walking again because of you. I sat there for a long time, holding that letter. I thought about all the years I'd spent invisible. All the nights I washed myself clean from someone else's dirt. All the mornings I put on that factory apron like it was armor, when it was really a cage. And now, someone was walking again. Because I did. That evening, I wrote back to the nonprofit. Just one sentence. I'm ready to build something bigger than revenge. To every woman watching. They told us we were too tired, too used, too broken to lead anything. But we are the ones who know how to survive. We are the ones who carry the truth. We are the ones who rise not to burn others, but to light the way. And maybe that's the most powerful thing of all. I had started planning the second foster center. It was going to be in Ohio, the same city the woman from the letter lived in. I thought it was poetic, starting the next chapter where someone else had found her first breath of freedom. The local team was excited. A small community college offered to donate training space. Women's shelters were already referring names. It was finally moving, and for the first time in my life, I was building not from survival, but from vision. And then, just like before, he found a way to slither back into my life. It was Lorraine again, holding her phone awkwardly like it burned her palm. You need to see this, she whispered. A news article. A different station. A different city. But the same name. Dale Reardon, former factory owner accused of sexual coercion by second woman. I felt the air leave my lungs. It wasn't me. It wasn't anyone from our warehouse. It was a woman named Vanessa Hart, a temp worker who'd been hired at one of Dale's side operations years ago in Toledo. She'd been 17. 17. The article went on, how she'd filed a report in 2010, how it had disappeared, how her records vanished, and how Dale's legal team at the time had quietly settled with her family in exchange for silence. But now, she was coming forward. And she had receipts, emails, old text logs, a blurry photo of a man's hand bruising her arm, the same pattern, the same whispers. And suddenly, the media wanted more from me. Janet, do you have a statement about the newest accusation? Do you think Dale Reardon is a serial predator? Would you testify if this went to trial? I stared at my reflection in the bathroom mirror after the first call came. My eyes looked older again. Not weaker, just more tired. I didn't want to live in his shadow anymore. I had built something, reclaimed something. But how could I stay silent now, knowing someone else never got the chance to speak? That night, I pulled out my journal. The same one I used to write in during those factory years. And I wrote one thing. Maybe this is why I survived. Not just to rebuild my life, but to help others rebuild theirs. So I made a call. To Vanessa. Her voice trembled when she answered. But when I told her who I was, she broke down. I thought no one would believe me, she whispered. Not after all these years. I believe you, I said. And I'll stand next to you if you want. And just like that, the quiet survivor in me became someone else's shield. To every woman watching, healing isn't always soft. Sometimes it's sharp. Sometimes it asks you to speak, not just for yourself, but for the ones who never got to. You don't owe the world your trauma, but if you have the strength, even just a whisper, someone out there might be waiting for it like a lifeline. It was cold the day I walked into the courthouse. Not weather cold, bone cold. The kind that lives in your chest when you know you're walking back into a kind of hell, but this time, with your head held high. Vanessa sat beside me in the waiting room. 29 now, but she looked older. Not in her face, but in her eyes. The kind of woman who learned too young that silence was expected. That survival meant folding yourself small enough to be ignored. You don't have to do this, she whispered. I looked at her, this trembling, brave girl, and shook my head. Yes, I do. Because the first time, I didn't. And he walked free. The courtroom was smaller than I expected. Wooden benches. A few journalists. A judge with tired eyes. And in the corner, Dale. He looked like a man unraveling from the inside. His suit was wrinkled. His beard uneven. His hands fidgeted with a pen like it was the only thing keeping him tethered to the moment. He didn't look at me. Not once. The lawyer called my name, and I rose. Crutches gone now. My limp remained, but so did my resolve. I raised my hand. I swore to tell the truth. And then, I told it. All of it. The nights. The threats. The whispers. The kick. The floor. The silence. And when they asked me how I knew Vanessa was telling the truth, I said this. Because predators don't change. They just move to quieter rooms. And because I saw the same fear in her eyes that I used to see in mine, every time I walked into that warehouse. The judge asked me to remain available. Vanessa never had to testify. Because the prosecution said my statement, along with Luis's and the mountain of new documents from Dale's former employees, was enough. That night, back at my apartment, I sat with a cup of tea and stared at my television again. Another news report. Another photo of Dale. This time, the words underneath read, former executive indicted on multiple charges, including assault and coercion. And I felt something I hadn't in years. Not victory. Not revenge. But release. Like the chains I carried for decades had finally rusted enough to break. To every woman watching, there may come a time when you are asked to relive the worst day of your life, not for attention, not for pity, but to save someone else from living it too. And if you ever doubt whether your voice matters, remember this: my voice kept a predator from finding his next victim. And so can yours. 2 weeks before the trial, I got a call from a national morning show. The producer was kind, professional, warm. She told me how inspired she was by my speech at the women's conference, how brave I was for standing by Vanessa, how rare it was for someone in your age bracket, she said, to lead a movement. I bit my tongue at that part. My age bracket? Like I was a category, not a person. But I still said yes, because I knew the message was bigger than me now. Bigger than what happened in that warehouse. Bigger than Dale. It was about all of us, every woman who had been used, pushed aside, discarded because we weren't shiny anymore. The segment aired on a Monday morning. Live. Across the country. They asked me about my injury. They asked about the broken leg. They asked about the moment I took over the building where I once bled. And I told them everything. But the part that got people talking was when I said this. I was 62 when he broke me. I'm 65 now. And I have more power in my words than he ever had in his hands. The support flooded in first. Emails. Letters. Messages from women in their 50s, 60s, 70s, even 80s who told me this was the first time they'd heard someone say the things they'd lived through. Some wrote that they finally left abusive homes. Some told me they'd started therapy. Some just wrote, Thank you. You made me feel real again. But then came the other messages. From men. From angry women. From strangers who thought I was making it up for attention. Gold digger. Probably wanted it. Why didn't you say something back then if it was real? Old bag, looking for relevance. And the worst one. Too bad he didn't break your neck instead of your leg. I read that one 3 times. And then I put the phone down and didn't check it again for 2 days. That night, I sat on the edge of my bed and wondered, is this what it costs to be heard? You survive the abuse. You survive the silence. And then you have to survive the world's doubt on top of it? But then my doorbell rang. It was Vanessa. No makeup. Hoodie. Red eyes. I saw what they wrote about you, she said. I know what it feels like. And I wanted you to know I'm not scared anymore. Because of you. Because you didn't back down. She handed me a tiny pin. A silver circle with a single word etched on it. Still standing. I cried. Not because I was weak, but because I still was. To every woman watching. When you finally speak, they may not all cheer. Some will try to shame you. Some will try to silence you again. But if even one woman hears you and stands up, you've already changed the world. Don't stop speaking. Not now. Not ever. The courthouse was colder this time. Not in temperature, but in tension. There were more cameras. More reporters. More people watching, waiting, whispering. Because this wasn't just a hearing. This was the trial. The state of Michigan versus Dale Reardon. Charged with multiple counts of workplace abuse, sexual coercion, assault, and obstruction. Vanessa was there, sitting behind the prosecution. Her hands trembled in her lap. But her chin? It never dropped. Not once. I sat in the second row. Not to speak. Just to be seen. Because sometimes, presence alone is power. Especially when it's the face your abuser thought he'd erased from the world. The courtroom was still as opening arguments began. Dale's defense painted him as an old-fashioned manager from a different era, a phrase that made my stomach twist. But the prosecutor, she was sharp. Fierce. Unapologetic. And then, on the third day, something happened that none of us expected. The prosecution called a surprise witness. An older woman. Late 70s. Tall. Cane in one hand. Dignity in the other. Her name was Eloise Parkins. I didn't know her. But I'll never forget what she said. She used to work with Dale at his very first warehouse job. Back in 1985. She had filed an HR complaint against him back then for cornering her in a stockroom and whispering things he'd do to her if she weren't married. But it never went to court. Because the complaint was sealed by the company's lawyers. Buried in an internal archive. Until now. The prosecutor held up the faded report. Yellowed. Creased. Signed by Eloise. Signed by Dale. This man's behavior spans 4 decades, she said. For decades of manipulation, abuse, and systemic silencing of women too afraid or too unsupported to fight back. Gasps. The courtroom buzzed. Dale stared straight ahead. Pale. Silent. Like he'd finally felt the walls closing in. During recess, I stepped outside for air. My hands were shaking. Because the truth I had carried like a secret tumor in my chest was no longer just mine. Other women were speaking. Other stories were surfacing. And Dale Reardon, the man who once told me I was lucky to be touched, was now surrounded by voices louder than his own. To every woman watching, the world may try to bury your truth. They may file it away, seal it, call it irrelevant or in the past. But truth has a heartbeat. And someday, someone will open that file, and the world will finally see what they tried to hide. It came in a plain envelope. No return address. No stamp. Just slid under the door of the foster center sometime between closing and sunrise. I thought it was another hate letter. But when I picked it up, I noticed the handwriting. Careful. Neat. Written like someone who had thought about every word before pressing pen to paper. I opened it slowly. Dear Miss Foster, my name is Lila Reardon. I'm his daughter. My breath caught. He had a daughter? I haven't spoken to my father in over 20 years. Not since I was 17 and left home for good. He told people I was rebellious, troubled. But the truth is, I ran because of what I saw, what I heard, what I feared he'd do to me next. My hands trembled as I read on. I watched him hurt my mother. I watched him lie, manipulate, use people like tools. I wasn't allowed to speak at the dinner table. He'd call my mother a dead-eyed burden and say things like, "A woman's job ends when her skin starts to wrinkle." The words cut through me like glass. Not because they shocked me, but because they didn't. They sounded like echoes of my own past. Of Vanessa's. Of Eloise's. When I saw your story on the news, I couldn't look away. Because you weren't just telling your story. You were telling mine too. And I want you to know, I believe every word. Then came the last line. If there's ever a moment where my voice can help, I'll be there. I've waited over 2 decades for someone to say the things I never could. Thank you for doing it. For all of us. Lila Reardon. I sat down, let her press to my chest, eyes filling with something I hadn't felt in a long time. Grief. Not for him, but for the women who had to carry pieces of him inside their hearts like barbed wire. Women like his wife, his daughter, and now me. I never asked for a movement, never dreamed I'd become a voice for others. But somehow, my story had cracked open a dam. And from that crack, the truth kept flowing. To every woman watching. Sometimes the people who hurt us the most leave damage that stretches far beyond what we see. And sometimes, the greatest justice isn't just stopping them. It's healing the ones they left behind. If you've ever carried the shame someone else should have held, you are not alone. You never were. The courtroom was packed that day. Journalists, survivors, advocates, even strangers who had never met Dale Reardon but had lived their own quiet versions of his destruction. The air was so still, I could hear people breathing. I sat near the front. Vanessa beside me. Eloise behind me. Lila was there too, standing in the shadows near the back, arms crossed tightly, like she needed the whole room to hold her up. Dale sat motionless at the defendant's table. He looked smaller than ever. No tie. His lawyer whispered to him, but he didn't respond. Just stared at the judge's bench like a man waiting for a lightning strike. Then the clerk stood. On the count of assault and battery against Ms. Janet Foster. Guilty. On the count of workplace coercion and sexual exploitation. Guilty. On the count of obstruction of prior investigation. Guilty. And finally, on the count of sustained harassment of multiple employees over a 20-year period. Guilty. I didn't cheer. I didn't clap. I just exhaled, for the first time in years. Dale's shoulders slumped. Like someone had cut the strings from a marionette that had been dancing too long. Sentencing would come later. But the verdict? The verdict was everything. I turned to Vanessa, and she was crying, silently, shaking, but smiling through it. Lila nodded to me from across the room. We didn't speak. We didn't have to. Because the silence between women who have survived the same man is sacred. But then came the letter. Delivered through his lawyer. 2 pages. Handwritten. Janet, you probably have no reason to read this. Maybe you already burned it. Maybe you laughed. But if there's any piece of you that remembers who I was before all of this, I need you to understand I never meant to become a monster. I was raised to believe men had the right to take, to control. I didn't question that until it was too late. And now, I've lost everything. My business, my family, my name. If there's anything human left in me, it's the part that remembers your eyes the night I broke you, and the shame that's lived inside me ever since. If you're willing, I'd like to see you. One last time. Not for forgiveness. Just so I can say the thing I never said when I had all the power. I'm sorry. Dale, I stared at the letter for a long time. It didn't bring comfort. It didn't bring rage. It just sat there, like a dying echo from a voice that used to thunder. And I had to decide, would I see him? Not for him. For me. To every woman watching, sometimes justice doesn't end in a gavel strike. Sometimes it ends in a choice. A choice to look the past in the face and decide whether it deserves your final breath, your final words, or just your silence. I didn't decide right away. The letter sat on my nightstand for 3 days. I read it once, then again, then folded it up like it might disappear if I willed it hard enough. Everyone told me not to go. What's the point? Vanessa asked. He doesn't deserve your presence, Eloise said. He's just trying to make himself feel better, Lila warned. And maybe they were all right. But there was one thing I hadn't done yet. I hadn't looked him in the eye after the verdict. I hadn't spoken to him as the woman he tried to erase, who now sat on the ashes of everything he once owned. So I made the choice. Not for him, but for me. They gave us a private room in the detention center. Cold table, 2 metal chairs, a guard at the door. He was already seated when I walked in. He didn't stand, didn't smile, just looked at me. And for the first time since I'd known him, he looked afraid. I sat across from him, straight-backed, calm, silent. He opened his mouth first. You didn't have to come. No, I said. I didn't. He nodded, hands folded like a man in prayer. But there was no redemption in his eyes, just exhaustion. The kind that comes when the mask you've worn for 40 years finally falls off. I've thought a lot about what I did, what I said, what I became. I don't want your forgiveness. I just want to know, did I ruin your whole life? I leaned forward. You broke me, I said. You used me. You stripped me of everything I had left. And then you left me bleeding on a floor like trash. He flinched. I didn't stop. But here's the thing, Dale. You didn't ruin my life. You tried to. But I built a new one. And now, every day that I wake up and breathe air as a woman you no longer control, that's victory. He didn't cry. But something in him cracked. I saw it in his hands, in his jaw, in the way he looked down like a child being scolded for the first time. I stood. I don't forgive you, I said. But I'm done carrying you. And then I walked out. No tears. No trembling. No second look. Just steps. Steady ones. Each one louder than every threat, every whisper, every broken word he ever threw at me. To every woman watching, there may come a moment when the person who broke you is finally beneath you, emotionally, legally, spiritually. And you will have the choice to scream, to forgive, to walk away. Whatever you choose, let it be yours. Because that is power. 3 months later, the Foster Community Employment Center expanded to its 3rd location. We opened one in Toledo in honor of Vanessa, and another in Baton Rouge, where a group of retired nurses had written to me asking how to replicate our model. I never imagined my name would mean anything more than a whisper on old time cards, but now it was engraved in brass at every entrance. Janet Foster Center for Women Over 50. A place built not with vengeance, but with vision. Every day, I walked the halls and saw lives that might have been broken, unbreaking themselves. Women sitting at computers for the first time in years. Women learning trades, starting businesses, sharing stories they had buried so deep, even their mirrors had forgotten them. And sometimes, they'd ask me, how did you survive all that? How did you get from the floor of that warehouse to here? And I'd tell them the truth. I didn't think I would. But I didn't do it all at once. I did it one choice at a time. One choice to speak. One choice to stand. One choice to keep waking up and saying, not today. Dale Reardon was sentenced to 12 years in prison. I never followed up. I didn't want to know how he was doing. Because when you're finally free, you don't need to keep looking back at the cage. You just walk. One morning, I stood outside the center just before the sun came up. The sign glowed in the early light. Foster. I traced the letters with my fingers. Not long ago, my name felt like a burden, a forgotten thing. Now it meant safety, strength, start again. And that's all I ever wanted. To every woman watching this, If you're over 60 and the world has convinced you that you've passed your usefulness, if your family ignores you, if your body aches, if your silence has been mistaken for weakness, hear me. You are not done. You are not broken. You are not invisible. And even if someone once tried to ruin your story, you can still write the final chapter and make it yours.